We're at 1655 meters up Mount Jutland, and we have reached a...
We're actually at 1725, sorry.
Never mind, we're at 17. Never mind, let's just not.
When I was 6 years old, I got sick. Time went by, and I didn't get better. I was losing weight, I was insatiably thirsty, and my eyes were red and glassy. When my parents took me to the family doctor, they said I needed help that was beyond the resources available at their clinic. I remember watching the windshield wipers swatting the raindrops into the night as we crossed the Lionsgate Bridge on our way to Vancouver's BC Children's Hospital. After a gauntlet of medical tests, the doctors determined that I had type 1 diabetes. Having type 1 diabetes meant that my body's immune system was killing its own insulin-producing beta cells. Insulin converts the glucose in food into energy that the body uses as fuel. Without natural insulin, the glucose accumulates in the bloodstream without being metabolized. For most of human history, diabetes was a death sentence, but in 1921, researchers at the University of Toronto achieved the miraculous. They synthesized an artificial insulin that could be injected into the body. The new drug returned balance to the patient's blood glucose levels. This discovery has saved the lives of millions of people, including my own. At diagnosis, it seemed that everything about the outdoors was dangerous. Too much glucose-burning exercise, unreliable access to medical help, too many supplies to cart around. Starting at age 10, I attended and later worked at a summer camp for kids with type 1 diabetes called Camp Kakamela. I learned that with the right planning, caution, and awareness of my body's messaging, I was capable of doing what anyone else could do, and of accessing the lessons that a relationship with nature has to offer. The backcountry became a challenging ground where I learned to manage my diabetes in an environment with little margin for error. I have experienced some difficult situations which, though scary at times, deepened my understanding of my body's needs and strengthened my ability to care for myself in a crisis. By pushing my limits, the outdoors gave me the opportunity to reclaim my independence and confidence from what was presented as an unbearably restrictive diagnosis. There are two types of diabetes, both of which are often misunderstood. About 90% of people with diabetes have type 2. I am among the minority who live with type 1. Unlike type 2, which has a gradual onset usually in adulthood, type 1 appears suddenly and earlier in life. The symptoms of type 1 cause immediate health emergencies, whereas the symptoms of type 2 can take years to notice. Type 1 can only be controlled with insulin. Type 2 can be treated with diet, exercise, and other medications, with insulin sometimes prescribed. There is no cure for either condition, but preventative steps can be taken for type 2, which is not the case with type 1. Keeping a diabetic's blood sugar in a healthy range is like bowling without guardrails for the first time. Your blood sugar will go dangerously high and dangerously low without the body reacting to keep it in check. Instead, the diabetic has to do that job themselves. Eating carbohydrates raises the blood sugar, and meals are accompanied by a dose of insulin to metabolize the glucose. Exercise can be used to help burn excess sugar in the bloodstream. When the blood sugar drops too low, it can be raised by ingesting fast-acting sugar like candy or juice. When it gets too high, insulin is used to correct or lower the blood sugar. I keep track of my blood sugar by testing it using a glucometer, a device that uses a small sample of blood obtained by a needle prick to the finger. I took insulin manually using syringes until I was 12 years old when I got an insulin pump, a labor-saving device that helps calculate dosages and administers the insulin through a tube connected to my body. Today, I live in Ottawa, Ontario with my partner Becca. In May 2021, we left our jobs as government policy analysts, Becca to take her master's degree in the fall, and me to work on creative projects. Over the summer, we set our sights on the Vancouver Island Trail.
The Vancouver Island Trail, VIT for short, is a patchwork made up of government-maintained trail, volunteer-maintained footpaths, rural back streets, logging roads, and bushwhacking routes in uncleared forests.
The trail runs the length of Vancouver Island from end to end, crossing the ancestral and unceded territory of the Coast Salish, Nuu-Chah-Nulth, and Kwakwaka'wakw First Nations. It starts in the provincial capital city of Victoria and ends at the Cape Scott Lighthouse to the north.
The trail is developed and maintained by a small but industrious group of volunteers called the Vancouver Island Trail Association. When we start our hike in June 2021, the trail is about 90% complete. We will be among the first 10 hikers to attempt the trail in one long trip.
Having type 1 is a risk multiplier. It adds a layer of complexity to every pre-existing hazard on the trail, as well as a significant logistical burden. Meticulous planning is the key to making a trip like this work, and we spent over a year preparing. We drew up detailed dietary plans, diabetes supply inventories, and trail notes, which we packed into 8 resupply boxes. My mum Vicky generously agreed to mail these boxes to post offices along our route. On June 16th, we catch a ferry to Victoria, kicking off 6 weeks of good times, bad times, high blood sugars, low blood sugars, peaks, and valleys. Vancouver Island is the home and ancestral territory of the Coast Salish, Nuu-Chah-Nulth, and Kwakwaka'wakw. These groups encompass dozens of First Nations with distinct histories, social structures, and cultures.
As white settlers, this trip is made possible by privilege inherited at the expense of the land and its original guardians. While this film documents our experience as hikers, it must be framed within this broader colonial context.
We continue to reflect on our role in the ongoing exploitation and dispossession of First Nations from their land, and extend our deep gratitude to the Coast Salish, Nuu-Chah-Nulth, and Kwakwaka'wakw people for the experiences we have as guests on their territories.
The first sections of trail pass through parkland, semi-rural residential areas, and farmland in the Cowichan Valley, on the unceded territory of the Wasanac, Lekwungen, Malahat, and Cowichan First Nations.
To our pleasant surprise, my blood sugar levels so far were actually better than they were at home in the city, likely the result of consistent exercise and a tightly planned diet. When I experienced a low blood sugar, we found our planned treatment highly effective. 6 sugar tablets to help raise the blood sugar, a protein bar to help stabilize the blood sugar once it was raised, and a generous drink of water to help the body digest it all.
We reach Lake Cowichan, the first stop of our trip after 4 days of hiking. We stay at a campground on the lake just outside of town.
Oh, are you filming?
Yeah.
Oh. I'm just changing my CGM sight. My continuous glucose monitor.
What does that do?
The CGM, or continuous glucose monitor, monitors blood sugar in real time and sends an alert when it is going too high or too low. It needs to be calibrated every few hours by a manual finger poke test and must be replaced every 10 days. This is my second attempt of the morning. The first one didn't quite go in properly, which sucks because it's wasted and those are really expensive. It's a bit of a process to get them in there. Nice. Okay.
Do we have success?
So far, so this is the transmitter. This is the part that actually sends the information to the insulin pump. I attach it here. And then hopefully, within a few seconds, we should get a blinking green light. But yeah, there it is. There's the green light. I don't know if you can see it with the sunlight, but it's there.
So now what are you doing?
I'm pairing it to the pump. It's kind of like a Bluetooth thing.
As we prepare to leave Lake Cowichan, our mind is on the forecast. The temperature is supposed to hit the high 30s over the next few days, which is dangerously hot for hiking.
Yeah. We're walking through this cut block. We just got out here pretty abruptly from some second growth forest. Just walking through. It's stinking hot out. In the woods there's a bunch of shade, but out here there's nothing to shelter or protect you from the sun. You are very vulnerable and very exposed. During our stay in Lake Cowichan, I realized I had forgotten a vial of the testing strips that my glucose testing kit uses to absorb blood samples. I went to the pharmacy and picked one up. One vial of test strips, which might last about a month, costs just shy of $50. Luckily, my private health insurance from the job I had left in May was still in effect and covered 80% of the overall cost. There is a common understanding that Canada's universal healthcare system takes care of the cost of managing diabetes. This is unfortunately not true. Diabetics, even those with private insurance, pay for a significant portion of their treatment costs every year, often running into the thousands of dollars. According to the Canadian Diabetes Association, high treatment costs prevent 57% of Canadians with diabetes from fully complying with their treatment plan. On top of the financial costs, the administrative burden of navigating this patchwork of insurance providers, government programs, diabetes clinics, supply manufacturers, and pharmacies is equivalent to a part-time job on top of whatever other responsibilities the diabetic is carrying. Many diabetics experience burnout, sometimes called diabetes fatigue, as a result of this workload. This section, located on the territory of the Nuu-Chah-Nulth First Nations, runs up the Alberni Inlet, a narrow finger of the Pacific Ocean that cuts deep into the island, with the town of Port Alberni sitting at the tip. Like the section of trail before Lake Cowichan, the Alberni Inlet Trail runs along the route of an old railway grade. Unlike the earlier section, work on this railway was abandoned at the outbreak of World War I, and the many trestles that span its canyons have been left to decay. We arrive in Port Alberni at the apex of a historic heat wave that's frying the Pacific Northwest. The city of Port Alberni sets a new high temperature record that day at 42.7 degrees Celsius. When we look for a place to get dinner, the first restaurant we visit has closed because the heat in the kitchen had become too dangerous to work in. Supposedly a 1 in 1,000 year event, the extreme heat was determined to be 150 times more likely due to human-induced climate change. 595 people died of the heat in British Columbia alone, making it the deadliest weather event in Canadian history. In Port Alberni, we are hosted by two VIT volunteers named Joan and Steve. We are eating dinner on their porch one night when we see smoke on the horizon. A small wildfire has broken out at the town's edge. The town of Lytton on the mainland sets an all-time Canadian high temperature record on June 27th at 46.6 degrees. It breaks that record the next day, and again the day after, at 49.6 degrees. On the fourth day, Lytton burned down in a wildfire that claimed the lives of 2 people. The increase in the rate and severity of natural disasters due to climate change is especially scary for a diabetic. Insulin and diabetes supplies make their way to patients through a long and complex supply chain, a single disruption in which can spell disaster for someone reliant on these products. For example, a resupply box never arrives in Port Alberni due to postal service interruptions from the heat. It's hard not to feel like these logistical threads are all too fragile in the face of our planet's deteriorating temperament. Due to the heightened risk of wildfires on their property, Mosaic Forestry Management closed the next section of trail along the Beaufort mountain range. We are forced to skip the section, which is actually convenient given the delay of our resupply box. Joan and Steve drive us to the town of Cumberland, downhill of the Forbidden Plateau in Strathcona Provincial Park, where our next section begins. I often tell people that I am grateful to have been diagnosed at age 6, as opposed to later in life. I had no real lifestyle to adjust. Young children are malleable and adjust to new circumstances with surprising flexibility. Things are more difficult for those who develop type 1 diabetes in their teenage years. They have habits and routines that are beginning to harden as they grow into adulthood, and a diagnosis can be earth-shattering. A diagnosis changes your life overnight. You are told all sorts of scary information. More than 20 Canadians die of diabetes-related complications every 24 hours. Anxiety and depression are more common in adolescents with diabetes. There is a stigma associated with the word diabetes. I know many teenagers who didn't even tell their friends when they were diagnosed due to embarrassment. Access to normalizing experiences like diabetes camp are important because they dismantle these psychological barriers to self-care.
This section starts in Strathcona Park, which sprawls across central Vancouver Island and contains many of the island's highest mountains. It sits on the unceded territory of the Nuu-Chah and Nuu-Chah-Nulth First Nations.
Our route will take us over 25 kilometers of Forbidden Plateau in Strathcona Park's southeast corner before climbing up Mount Jutland, an 1,800-meter tall peak by the park boundary. From there, we will continue northwards, out of the park and towards the Gold River Highway, where we plan to hitch a ride to the coastal town of Campbell River. At the end of day 1 in Strathcona Provincial Park, we make it to our destination, a backcountry hut on Douglas Lake. We make dinner and pass out in the bunks. Tomorrow will be a long day. We plan to cross the rest of Forbidden Plateau, then climb the bulk of Mount Jutland's elevation and camp out beneath the peak, setting us up for an easy ascent the day after. I'm just going to show you guys something. I've got a bit of an infected pump site here, so I waited a little bit too long to take this one out. You're supposed to leave them in for 3 days, but I think I left this in for like 4.5 before getting it out. So you see it's red, it's discolored, it's kind of swollen, and if you put your hand to it, it's hot. And it does hurt a little bit, so hopefully that clears up. This is what, I'll show you what it's supposed to look like. This is the pump site when it's in, so I left that in a little too long before changing it on this leg. So yeah, hopefully that clears up. We lost our polysporin, don't know what happened to it. So yeah, we'll keep an eye on it. So I just got a message on my pump telling me to replace my CGM because it's not working properly. Unfortunately, we don't have any more CGMs. So I'm just not going to have one for the next few days, I guess. I might try to take the transmitter out and just stick it back into the CGM. The transmitter is the white part, and then it comes out, and then I might try to just plug it back into the gray bit here and see if it starts working again. But I'm not super optimistic that it'll work, so we'll see how it goes. So that just means that I won't get any warnings before I'm going low or before I'm going high. I'll have to test my blood sugar with my testing kit, with my glucometer, to figure out where I'm at, and then like I'll feel it. Like I'll feel it when I go low, but I won't have a warning beforehand, unfortunately, which will make things more difficult. All right, Mount Jutland to the right. That is where we're going. Pretty excited to get up there. That'll be our first peak of the hike. It's going to be pretty spectacular. Clear day, perfect conditions. We got to keep the hats on, keep the sunscreen on because the sun's pretty powerful, but we're going to have some pretty sweet views.
On Mount Jutland, looking at Albert Edward. Atop Mount Jutland, we eat lunch and enjoy the scenery. Morale is high, and we are blissfully unaware that as we descend the mountain, we are heading into the most difficult 72 hours of the entire trip. From here, we plan to make our way down the mountain's north face, taking us outside the park boundaries and toward our destination for the night, a backcountry hut on Pearl Lake.
We start down the north face of Mount Jutland, away from the park. There is no trail, and the GPS route takes us across slippery, melting snowcaps and down a series of plateaus that resemble massive stairs leading down the mountain. The plateaus start to get broken up by cliffs and canyons from the countless glacial streams thundering down the mountainside, and the route leads us into a wall of forest. The bushwhack is agonizingly slow, and visibility is 2 meters at most. We do our best to blindly follow the GPS route, but it seems no matter what direction we go in, a cliff bars the way. One such cliff is divided by a deep ravine clogged with the debris of centuries worth of landslides and avalanches. We decide that our best option down the mountain is to scramble down the ravine. We cautiously climb into the deep chute, joining the massive trees and boulders that the mountain has tossed away. The descent is steady but slow. Many rocks are loose, and branches are dry and brittle, creating unreliable hand and footholds that need to be approached with extreme caution. The walls of the chute are steep and crumbly, and branches of decaying trees catch on our packs and clothes. As we continue our descent, rock walls rise on either side. Our options to climb out, should the need arise, narrow with each vertical meter. Boulders and tree trunks shift with our weight, and the risk of triggering a landslide is prominent in our thoughts. The evening sun moves across the sky as our second hour of climbing turns into a third, but the valley floor seems a little closer. If we are stuck in this ravine for another 3 hours, we will be climbing down in the dark, a possibility neither of us wants to even consider. As we continue our climb, a clearing becomes visible, and we think we spy a flat surface below us. That flat surface turns out to be our salvation. A surprise logging road, not marked on the map or our GPS, cutting across the mountain. We finally get out of the chute, embrace with relief, and lie down on the road with our eyes closed, exhausted.
We just got finished climbing down this ravine. There was a surprise logging road. I think it's the best surprise I've ever seen because I was really scared, and we were climbing for 2.5 hours and coming down the mountain, and now, yeah,
that was hell. There's a proposed route that runs that way, but we couldn't find it, and we kind of got sucked off of the main ridge that the proposed route's supposed to go on.
Why did we get sucked off?
Because we were bushwhacking, the bush was super thick, and there's no way to tell where you're going. Once out of the ravine, we motor down the mountainside on the logging road, eventually meeting back up with the official route. We're about 9 kilometers from a cabin on Pearl Lake, whose owner, Glenn, is a VIT volunteer who has offered use of the cabin to VIT hikers. After our experience coming down Mount Jutland, we are desperate for the imagined comforts of this cabin, and we march single-mindedly towards it.
Lying just north of the boundaries of Strathcona Park, the area around Pearl Lake was a pocket of biologically rich old-growth and wetland, and a haven for trout and salmon. In spite of efforts by conservationists to have the area added to the provincial park system for its protection, the area was logged a decade ago, leaving only thin strips of trees along waterways as required by provincial forestry policy. When we reach the turnoff for the lake cabin as marked on the GPS, we find the trail ends abruptly after about 300 meters. We poke around for a trailhead but find nothing but head height slash surrounding the dead end. We go back to the main road and look for other options but find nothing. The light is dimming and our eyes strain to see. We don our headlamps and glance at the trail notes. The map suggests that the route to the cabin runs right through thick slash. It is likely that logging operations mowed right over trails that once existed here. This would have been time to cut our losses and just camp on the road, but exhaustion and hunger cloud our judgment, causing us to make the monumental error of entering the slash pit in the dark.
So it's Sunday morning, the day after we made that terrible descent down that chute off of Mount Jutland. And we thought we were out of the woods at that point, but it got worse.
It had kind of just started at that point.
Slash is like the detritus of a clear-cut operation, so it's like fallen branches and rejected logs and stumps that form this layer of decaying organic material that can be like 6 feet deep. It was like 10 o'clock at night. There's a river that runs through it, and we forded it. We just walked through it up to our knees in our boots and socks because we wanted to get to this hut so badly. Our boots are still soaked, and then eventually we were in the middle of this slash field with no idea where we were. We couldn't see where we were going.
It was becoming messier and messier, so we decided to turn around.
Yeah, we turned around and just miserably camped on the road that we come up. It was like 11 o'clock at night by then. So yeah, here we are now. There's supposed to be a trail somewhere that's easier to get to this backcountry hut. So we're going to see if we can locate it. And then if we do find it, we're just going to post up there for a day and a night because we are bone tired and in pain.
I don't know. Was there anything that was getting you through that time?
Just the desperation of trying to get to the hut. Like, I just wanted it so bad.
Yeah, me too. I also was thinking about Domino's Pizza.
Despite yesterday's tribulations, the siren song of Glenn's cabin still calls to us. As we're hiking around Pearl Lake, we spy a dead-end logging road that gets within 50 meters of the lake's edge and decide to investigate. I bushwhack around the lake and find an old aluminum rowboat in the trees. I paddle back to where Becca is waiting with our bags. Further investigation reveals several holes at the bottom of the boat. After bailing out the water in the boat's hull, we zigzag across the lake towards the cabin, me using the boat's single paddle and Becca plugging the holes at the bottom of the boat with her fingers. This tree looks like a man who sneezed so hard that the boogers burst right out of the center of his face.
Gross.
We spend the day at the cabin, trying unsuccessfully to fish with a rod we find inside.
I caught a bush. Most people, they think catching fish is the goal. But most people are horribly confused.
Oh god, okay, watch you swing that thing. The next day, we get back in the boat and do it all over again.
I can't plug all the holes, so I'm just trying to find out the most important ones.
So there's more than there were yesterday?
Like it, but yeah.
Excellent.
What are you gonna get up when you get back?
Black olives, red onions, spinach, feta cheese, and mushrooms with extra sauce and well done.
Nice. I'm gonna get extra sauce, well done, with green olives and spinach and pineapple.
Yum. Pineapple, that'll be a controversial choice.
Back on land, we resume hiking northward. We had lost a battery pack during the bushwhacked Glenn's cabin 2 days prior, forcing us to finish the section early as our GPS doesn't have enough charge to make it to Campbell River. We make for the Buttle Lake Highway, where we can catch a ride into town.
This is the ridge of Mount Adrian. We've been walking up a switchback logging road for the past hour or so. It's been hard, but the views up here are pretty great. You can see Buttle Lake a little bit down in the valley there. That's where we're trying to get down to so we can get to the road and get a ride to Campbell River.
With our arrival in Campbell River, we are officially in the North Island, about halfway through the trip. The northern half of the island is sparsely populated. Here we will often go days without seeing another person. Before the arrival of Europeans, the North Island was a bustling, prosperous place, with an estimated population of 50,000. Starting around 1850, colonization brought foreign diseases, exploitation, and policies of forced assimilation. By 1900, the North Island's population was reduced to 5,000.
The first length of trail in this section runs parallel to Grills Creek, which is named after coho salmon that return early to their birthing streams. For a child or teenager with diabetes, the road to adulthood and independence can look like a rapidly approaching cliff. Many parents are tempted to manage their child's diabetes care for them into adolescence. This high-stakes helicopter parenting often leads to the patient struggling to control their diabetes later in life. The overnight loss of parental health insurance coverage and government assistance programs for youth often leaves diabetics scrambling. Diabetics in places with weak social safety nets have died because they attempt to ration insulin after aging out of their parents' insurance plan. My experience working at diabetes camp taught me that everybody with type 1 diabetes has the strength to attain independent control over their health. However, their growth must be respected as a transitional process, not a rush to a deadline, and their communities must provide them with the patience and support that they deserve. This section of trail lies in the unceded territory of the Nuu-Chah-Nulth First Nation. We are joined on the first day of hiking by Terry Lewis, the Director of Operations for the VIT Association. Terry is a joy to hike with. A former soil scientist, he is deeply knowledgeable about the environment we are traveling through, and we happily absorb the wisdom he shares about the geology and ecosystems surrounding us.
You know, I saw these big trees on a satellite image the first time. Mm-hmm. And I'll always remember the first time I walked in here, because I was by myself and I was just wandering around trying to figure out where to put the trail. Mm-hmm. And I walked into here and I walked through the stand, and I mean there was nobody here. But I can remember I was going, wow, look at that. And, as if I was with somebody. I kept saying, wow. Over and over. Like it was just like, it was so neat to find it.
So it's about 8 a.m. We're at Stewart Lake campsite, beautiful spot. But I woke up this morning to my insulin pump telling me that my insulin is not going in for whatever reason, and that my blood sugar is 21, which is much higher than we want it to be. So I changed my site, as you do in these situations, and then tried to correct, which means take insulin for the high to bring it down to a regular level. And then my pump told me that the insulin was not delivered again with that second pump, or with that second site. So I have to do this another time. I've got the new site here. This is the last site I just tried to put in that didn't work. So here's my reservoir with insulin in it, and I'm gonna connect that to the tubing here, the new tubing, and then the reservoir locks into the pump like this. Now I have to do what's called priming, which is where I fill the tube up with insulin. So I'm going to hold this button down on the pump, and it's going to keep a piston pushing forward until it reaches the bottom of the reservoir, so that it's in place. And then I'm going to stop. I'm going to know I'm ready to go when I see little bits of insulin coming out the end of the what's called the cannula there, which is the little needle that goes in the skin. So this is going to take a minute. It's really dusty because of all these logging trucks going by. Okay, there's a little bit of insulin coming at the end. I don't know if you can see that. So it's ready to go now. I'm going to put it in the inserter, peel the adhesive layers back so it's ready to go. Okay, so now it's locked and loaded and ready to go. To insert the sight, I position the spring-loaded plastic injector over the spot where I want to put it in this case my thigh. The sight itself is nestled inside the injector, which will push the sight's needle through the outer layers of skin, the epidermis and dermis, and into the subcutaneous layer of tissue between skin and muscle. I hold the injector in place as I push 2 buttons on either side of it, which releases the spring mechanism, causing the needle to punch through my skin and flatten the sight's sticky adhesive to the outer surface. With the sight held in place by the adhesive, I remove the injector and the metal needle, leaving behind a thin plastic coating called a cannula at the end of the tubing that insulin flows through to be absorbed by blood vessels in the subcutaneous tissue. The sight will stay in place for 3 days before it needs to be changed again due to the risk of infection and the growth of scar tissue.
Just go.
So the second sight that I put in this morning worked fine, and my blood sugar came down pretty fast, so that was awesome. The only issue right now is I'm looking at my insulin supply, and I think it's going to be good enough to get us to WAS, but it's going to be close. It's going to be cutting a little close to the edge, and the reason for that is I think there was a bottle of insulin in the package that was supposed to come to us in Port Alberni, but was delayed for whatever reason, and we had to move on before it got there. And as a result, I didn't get one of my bottles of insulin. We didn't pack one in every box because that would be way more than we need. But now the problem is one of them didn't arrive, and I think the next one is in WAS, fortunately.
I didn't know about any of this, so yeah, not enough insulin, maybe. It's a little unsettling. The next morning, we leave the White River and follow the logging road up the Kukumi Pass, which lies 1,000 meters above sea level between Kukumi Mountain and Watchtower Peak.
We've been hiking up. We've gone up about 400 vertical meters since we started hiking this morning. It is a hot day. The GoPro actually had some trouble turning on because it was so hot. But the scenery is unbelievable. There's not a cloud in the sky, and the mountains here are so rugged and wild and, I don't know, ancient. Like, they've got these old souls. Like, you know, you can almost make out faces in the rock. At the height of the Kukumi Pass, we run into another hiker named Miguel, who is hiking the Vancouver Island Trail north to south, the opposite direction of us. We exchange trip reports, and he warns us against hiking the Bonanza mountain range between Was, the next town, and Port McNeill, the town after, citing incomplete trail and nearly impassable terrain. Despite the bad news, it's a relief to see another person, especially a fellow Vancouver Island Trail hiker. Apparently, we are going to cross this log jam to get to the Showen Creek wreck site on the other side. You can see there is some blue flagging tape along the logs for what it's worth. Beck is wearing both of our hats because I'm wearing the GoPro on my head right now. Yeah, so we'll see how this goes. Nice work. Ooh, this is wobbly.
Yeah, Nick, that one looks a little rough.
I'm just gonna go across it fast, fast, fast. I heard a car door.
Pardon?
I heard a car door.
Ooh, civilization.
Oh, bingo.
After a lunch break at Showen Lake, we complete this section by hiking to Highway 19 outside of Was. In light of what we've heard about the state of the trail and the bonanzas, we decide to skip this section and hitch a ride to Port McNeill.
I'm just refilling all my rocket tubes, so you can see that I have here. Rockets are a type of candy I use to treat low blood sugars. In the city, I would treat lows with a juice box, but those are too heavy and fragile for hiking. So we got a big bag of them in our resupply box, so I'm just going through all the empty tubes right now and filling them back up with rockets to eat in the next section when I go low. So this is how much low stuff I've been carrying over a section at a time. It is usually a lot more than necessary. I've never even gotten close to finishing it, but it's nice to have a cushion and never having to worry about it. So we are back on the road again, just out of Port McNeill. We've been hiking for like, I don't know, half an hour. We're just following some logging roads until we get to the stretch of trail along the beach that'll take us to Port Hardy eventually. So all's well. We spent 3 days in Port McNeill. We really liked it there, but it's time to move on. The issue with the insulin that I was worried about on the last stretch ended up being all right. I had enough to last until we got into McNeill. Getting pretty sick of our oatmeal this morning. I had to fight really hard not to throw up when I ate it. Like, I had this horrible gag reflex that was so strong that I like teared up from the effort of suppressing it. So I don't know, we might have to figure out some way to shake up our breakfasts a little bit. We just forded the mouth of this river. A minute after getting out, I felt like a wet wriggling in my sandal, and I looked down and realized it was a small fish, like maybe about that long, that was stuck in my sandal strap, and it was wriggling against my ankle. So I got it out and threw it back in. Hopefully it was okay. Bear! Go the other way, please! Go the other way, please! So we're walking between Port McNeill and Port Hardy here. We're just south of the Suquash Creek, and we found this old industrial site in the woods. These are the remains of a steam donkey, which is a device that used to tow logs using a metal cable. You can see where the cable was wound around this spindle, and the gears would work it so that the cable would pull in trees that had just been downed. This is where the coal or whatever fuel would be shoveled in to power it, it being a steam engine. I'm not too sure what this is. On July 23rd, we board a water taxi in Port Hardy. It drops us off at Chashardy Bay, where the North Coast Trail begins at the eastern edge of Cape Scott Provincial Park, and we begin the final section of our trip.
Cape Scott Provincial Park is in the unceded territory of the Nuu-Chah-Nulth, a group of nations of the Kwakwaka'wakw people. Despite the long Indigenous history of the area, only 3 tiny parcels of territory in Cape Scott are now First Nations land. It is this dispossession that makes the North Coast Trail and our hike along it possible. A group of Danish settlers attempted to colonize Cape Scott at the turn of the 20th century. The settlement was abandoned when it became clear that the settlers' style of agriculture and market economy was unsuited to the local environment. The wooden buildings rotted away quickly in the rainy climate, leaving only some metal artifacts, depressions in the earth, and the odd fence post.
We are loving this boardwalk. This is good stuff. I'm not entirely sure what we're supposed to do here. So we just finished day one of mudding through the North Coast Trail. Started at Shushardy Bay and we just got out to the Skinner Creek campsite. And there it is, open ocean as far as the eye can see. That is a first for this trip.
Our second day on the North Coast Trail brings rain for the first time on this entire trip. We just came out of here, and this is what we see. Hey.
Bonjour. So we were just eating dinner and we reflected that we felt a lot more hungry the last couple days, even though our diet hasn't changed over the, like from this section to the last one.
This section has been physically demanding in ways that we weren't experiencing before.
We've both been craving cheese.
IKEA just introduced a new flavor of frozen yogurt.
I'm gonna pounce on that BC Ferries White Spot burger. That's gonna be really nice on the way back. Anyway, yeah, we're thinking about food a lot. Okay, so we're pulling in the cable car. This is our ride across the Nuu-Chah-Nulth River.
Nice.
There we are, and we're away.
Okay, here we go. Oh dang! Woohoo! This thing does not go slow. Thank you, Nick. You're doing great.
No problem. There's this black bear right in the middle of the beach, and we've been yelling at it and trying to get its attention, but it is not paying us any mind. We tried to go into the forest to bushwhack our way around it, but it's just way too thick to get through, and he's not budging. Okay, so the bear is not heeding us at all. We can't go through the forest. We've yelled at it, given it, like, it must know we're here. We've given it all the warning we can. So we're just gonna try and walk around the tree line around it while alerting it to our presence as we go. Hey bear! Okay, we're getting around it. Seems to be eating stuff that's in the seaweed that's washed up on shore. Okay, going around. I've never seen a bear so unintimidated by humans. Just letting us walk around it. Unbelievable. Okay, see you later.
We're hiking, you kept going low.
So I was going low a lot. Symptoms of a low blood sugar vary by person. I would describe mine as all the negative sensations of being inebriated without the fun parts. A watery weakness in the limbs, trouble thinking clearly, impaired speech, glazed eyes. A severe blood sugar induces panic as my body loses the energy to perform basic functions. Left untreated, this will culminate in seizure and a loss of consciousness. I've seen other diabetics have seizures, but have never had one myself. Yesterday and this morning and the day before, and I realized it's because I forgot to change my basal rate. In addition to the doses of insulin I administer manually to account for the food I eat, the pump also automatically administers small increments of insulin throughout the day to keep the blood sugar steady. This incremental dosage is called a basal and needs to be adjusted based on my level of activity. From my regular basal rate back to my hiking basal rate, which is much lower to account for all the exercise that I'm doing. So I burned through a lot of my low supplies, unfortunately, before I realized what was going on. So hopefully we have enough to get us to the end. Other things going on are that my CGM crapped out again. It gave me the sensor not working properly. So I think that's 3 CGM sensors in a row that have prematurely gone out on me. So I'm hiking without CGM today, and I'll put the new one in probably tonight. On our 5th day at Cape Scott Provincial Park, we arrive in Nell's Bight, our final campsite of the entire journey. We plan to post up here for 2 nights. Tomorrow we will go for a day trip up to the Cape Scott Lighthouse, the northernmost point of Vancouver Island and the official terminus of the Vancouver Island Trail.
We climb the hill to the lighthouse and are surprised to find ourselves in a surreal, neatly manicured compound painted bright red and white, the colors of the Canadian Coast Guard.
We made it. We are on the Cape Scott Lighthouse. How you doing? Yeah. This is the end. Our last day on the Vancouver Island Trail is a hike south to San Joseph Bay parking lot. My parents have driven from Vancouver to meet us there. We eat a picnic on the beach before getting in the car and heading back south. It's a bizarre feeling watching hundreds of hard-earned kilometers fly by in mere hours at the touch of a pedal. I've heard people say that they could never handle the responsibility of having type 1 diabetes. Before diagnosis, none of us would have thought so either. Nobody gets to choose the challenge of living with a chronic health condition. The challenge chooses us, and there is simply no alternative to adapting. A diagnosis of type 1 diabetes is like a cosmic slap that can shatter a patient's reality, but humans are more resilient than we give ourselves credit for. With time and practice, those broken shards of reality knit themselves back together, forming a new outlook on life that is different but enduring. Seemingly unthinkable burdens become routine, and these hard-earned habits crystallize into an almost subconscious layer of a new normal. Action. Okay, go.